Should I turn it down, or is that?
It's all right. I won't put it into my mouth.
I'm going to get you your water actually too, okay? Can you see the screen okay? Can you? Yeah. I'm just going to get you to stay there.
Can you flip this for me?
What's that?
Okay. All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. One of the things I want to talk about a little bit this afternoon, I alluded to the importance of the glue that holds Native people together. And it's basically the idea of the ancestors, that we are here because of the ancestors. We would be nothing without people paving the way before we got here. We owe a tremendous amount to our ancestors. And whether we are Native or any other nationality, any other ethnic group, that relationship is the same. We would not be here if it weren't for all those people that came before us, and they made us who we are. We need to respect that. We need to honor that. Anything short of that is dishonor. Natives, and certainly the Nehanics, believed that it was so important to recognize your ancestors that if you did anything other than honorable, that was honorable, you would be dishonoring them. It was not in the Native worldview to do anything that would dishonor your ancestors or yourself. You couldn't lie, you couldn't cheat, you couldn't swindle. You know, I mean, it just wasn't in the behavior of natives 300 and 400 years ago. That was not the case with the Europeans. When the Europeans came here, they came. Well, I'm gonna pose the question to you. What did you learn in school? Why did Europeans come to the New World? Why did the Puritans come here? Why did the Pilgrims come? Persecution. Was that, so they were seeking religious freedom? Is that correct?
That's what I read in my history book.
Okay. I can't envision any group that was less democratic than the Pilgrims and Puritans. They were the toughest group of people. If you didn't conform exactly to the model of what they thought was proper, Hester Prynne got an A carved into her forehead. All right, for adulteress. Trying to think of other court cases. The Salem witch trials were based on Puritan beliefs of visions of behavior that was not in Christian dogma. Okay? Huge. And those people were tortured to death and forced to recant. It was not a democratic society. They dealt with people, with others, and we learn this over and over again, how we treat other people. It's very important. And they didn't accept other people. It was only themselves and their point of view. So they were not a very open society. Yeah. idea of where we all come from as natives, certainly we came from our ancestors, but who was the first ancestor? The belief of where we came from, the clouds, came down on the back of a turtle, landed on the back of a turtle in the ocean. That's their belief in how things started. And that's central to many, many native beliefs as to how things began. It's no real difference than Christian beliefs or other beliefs. The world, how we got here, is an age-old question. How did we get here? And there are various explanations that attempt to satisfy the question with us all. So the Native American belief of the world being basically positioned on the back of a turtle, well, that's why our emblem has a turtle on it. It also has Wigwam Rock, which is something that's directly related to Nehantic. It's all part of how we view the world. Next slide. We've been here for thousands of years. I mentioned that this morning. At least 4,000 years. Nehanics had a great connection to this particular parcel at Black Point. It was the traditional burial ground around which a reservation was placed in 1671. That connection to that burial ground was all important because that burial ground had the remains of our ancestors. We owe it to them to protect, to honor, to respect them. It's part of who we are. Can't be any different. Part of who we are. This is sacred land. This is sacred land to the Native community, to Nehantics, but to all Native persons. Next slide. Yes, they are who we are. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for them. Respect, honor, justice. So here's the rub. Next slide. When we got Roger Williams in 1646 put together a book called The Key to the Languages of America. That book, while is an attempt at putting together a vocabulary of native terms so that Europeans could converse with natives, he also has quite a few observations in it, and it's really pretty remarkable. And both of these are quotes. I can't really read them very well, but the bottom line natives pose to him over and over again is, how can you English say one thing and do another? How can you do that? That is a dishonor to your ancestors. It was not in the vernacular or language of natives to dishonor themselves or their ancestors. It just, you couldn't do it. And yet over and over and over again, the English did that. Not only the English, but later on, the American colonists. The American federal government did. Over and over again. Said one thing, did another. You would think that the native population would accept that and say, oh, that's the way these guys are, and I guess we're going to play that game too. They never did. They kept on going back over and over again to courts of law that were basically put together, next slide, by Europeans, by the English, and in doing so, they put their hands in a concept called justice. Even though they never really realized it from the authorities here, they kept on going back, trusting that sooner or later it's got to happen. And they believed that the premises that our nation was founded upon were correct, were right. The ideas of freedom, equality, justice. Natives believed in that. They believed in it because it was inherent within their fiber, within their culture, within every bone in their body. They believed in that approach: equality, justice, honor, integrity. Over and over again. Couldn't believe how the Europeans could do one thing and say another, break promises over and over and over again. It dishonored your relatives, your ancestors. Other things that would show up in legal courts, natives were not dealt with on the same plane as Europeans. There's the story of Hannah O'Kish, but I'm going to give you another one. A lady named Anna Heffernan. Anna Heffernan went to church in Lyme. Actually, it's actually Old Lyme, but it was not. And at that time, she went to church, and on the way back to her house, she was attacked by a guy named John Waite, and there was a court proceeding based on it. And he was charged with rape, and the proceedings took over a year. The court of law basically ruled that the statute of limitations had expired, and after 1 year, John Waite basically went free. The court at the same time interrogated Anna Heffernan, Indian woman of Lyme, and tried to make her recant that this didn't really happen. She never did. She never stated that. But because of the statute of limitations, it was thrown out. Over and over again, we get cases like this that came before the courts in London about various natives that trusted that the courts would properly deal with them the way they dealt properly with everybody else. It didn't happen very often. I mentioned this morning that in economic terms, the biggest court findings were against natives that were unable to pay or refused to pay debt. They didn't understand the concept of debt. Nobody in a native community is in debt to somebody else. Everybody's equal. Everybody shares and properly levels the playing field so no one individual has advantage over another. Your power, your respect, your being isn't assessed on what you've accumulated. They try to get rid of the concept of greed. Instead, you are assessed on what you can give away. The idea of a potlatch, which is a western or northwestern coast native idea, where you have a big party and you give everything away that you have rather than trying to amass material wealth. Those people that could throw the biggest party were considered to be powerful and most respected. In hunter-gatherer communities, a idea of modesty was very, very important. When a hunter would go out and would be more successful than somebody else, he did everything in his power to try to say, oh, well, you know, that deer just fell on my arrow. I don't know how that happened. Trying to take away that he is somehow better than another hunter. Because what comes up when somebody is better than somebody else? What arises? Jealousy, greed. You get those kinds of feelings within a group of people that are used to working together day in, day out. Greed doesn't serve you well. Next thing that happens is people start fighting. The next thing is you start having wars. Gee, I think we knew a lot about that. Mm-hmm. The idea of honor, integrity, justice, the native concepts are pretty foreign to Europeans and capitalists. The idea of equality, of slavery, of breaking laws, Natives had no idea about any of these things. They learned pretty quickly. They became the first slaves in colonial New England. There were slaves that were brought here. They were Irish, brought here by the Pilgrims, the Puritans. Very quickly, the Puritans recognized the fact that there's so much work to be done out here, and there's not enough of us to do the work. We've got to get ourselves into some slaves. That is really what happened in King Philip's War in the 1670s. It was a planned approach of how to get slaves. We're going to get native slaves. And those native slaves could do the work for us. The Europeans learned the lesson pretty quickly that they didn't know the land very well, especially here in southern New England. And those people that had been living here for 4,000 years or more knew it pretty well. So as those people were being enslaved, they would show up and they'd work for a couple days, and then they'd kind of disappear. Hey, where are our slaves? You sure they're not trying to reconnoiter us and find our weak spots? They know this land better than we do. They're plotting against us. Those are the feelings that started growing in Puritan America in the 1640s. By 1645, they were planning, let's get rid of our Native American slaves, and we will trade them on the islands of the West Indies for African Americans. And very clearly in Rhode Island, Emmanuel Downing made a proclamation about how we should get into a nest of Moors, of African slaves. We will sell our native slaves or trade them, and then those African slaves will know the land no better than us. So they can't slink into the forest and disappear. They will be fish out of water, and they can do our work for us. Those are the basic beginnings of slavery here in America. And by the way, I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about the South. I'm talking about here. This area was the hotbed of slavery right up to the Revolution. New London County and going into Rhode Island. Native Americans, especially the Nehantic, were very, very much anti-slavery. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, they worked continually for justice, equality, freedom. They were the beginners of many abolition movements. One family in particular moved up to Middletown, the Jeffrey family, and started up a church that is known as the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which was the beginning of the NAACP. It was started by Asa Jeffrey, a Nehantic. But yet, it's shown in Connecticut Freedom Trail as an African American location, and they just didn't know that Asa Jeffrey was in fact Native. During that period of the early 1800s, we have many individuals who migrate into cities or urban areas and work for justice, equality. There is a connection to John Brown, Stephen Douglas, both in Springfield. Those are things that are happening amongst Native American and African American groups, but don't discount the connection that Native Americans had to the abolition movement. Later on, they're working in the Underground Railroad out in Wisconsin. Families that you see here today. That tradition continually goes forth into the 20th century. Many of our Nehantic families and Nehantic ancestors have worked in civil rights. have tried to set things straight, tried to revise the history that's been written that discounts either Native or African activities in trying to attain freedom. The quest for justice, for equality, is inherent in Native American tradition. It started with the idea of who you are and that you should be humbled, knowing full well that your ancestors are who you are, and you owe it to them to live properly. And that's a message that I'm trying to send very, very clearly. It's something that we believe in to this very day. And that's all I have to say.
You might have said this, but what kinds of labor were the Native Americans forced to do for the homes? I heard that they actually made the stone walls, like clear the rocks out.
Yep. There's a lot of stone, tradition of stone masonry, heavy manual labor, and that's throughout. I mean, you've got stonework, you've got logging. I've got a really nice document from Governor Leet in, I think that's 1645. Leave my Indian men alone as they cut wood down in Guilford and Kudu. Those are the kinds of things that we know early on that natives are being made to do. On the other hand, women are treated, and kids are treated the same way, and they are involved in becoming domestic servants, field hands, so forth and so on.
Yeah.
This area was known not only as a area of communities, but also the term plantation is totally legitimate. There are several large plantations in Lyme and Salem and Colchester. Plantations of several thousand acres. And one of those plantations, we're pretty sure, had over 360 slaves. And that's prior to the Revolution. And if you ever go up to Salem Ice Cream and you read the information on the quart of ice cream that you buy, which is really good, by the way, it'll say that Mr. John Mumford cleared these fields from the area where the cows graze today, and those cows' milk turns into your wonderful ice cream. I don't think Mr. Mumford ever lifted a stone, but he was tied into a slave trade that was very significant. Any other questions? Yes.
In the fields, the now wood just south right of the ice cream place, there's a black cemetery on one side and an Indian on the other.
Yep, absolutely. Some of them are marked, but not tremendously well.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
Where
Yes.
is that, please?
In Salem.
It's on private land.
Yeah,
so-
Gunji Road.
Oh, Gunji.
Darling Road. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you happen to know on the Waterford side, there's Waterford Oscodachi, not?
Yeah.
There's a point over there opposite the point of Sandy Point, called Howison Point. Do you know anything about that one?
Alice?
Howison, I think.
No, I don't know anything about
It
it.
was it's the other point.
Yeah.
Actually, and, it's interesting because at one time it was all pine forest, and I heard that, it was a fishing area.
It should, and then you got Bottomless Brook running way through, is that correct?
No, this is Oscodachi, it's right in the.
Okay.
Sandy Point is? Sandy Point's a deep.
It's down below the Golden Spur.
Yeah, it's so basically you're on the 9-minute river at
Alright.
the points, in Waterford, in the.
Oh, okay.
In water.
There is,
Okay.
yeah.
So there's Sandy Point and then this other point called Howison Point. And that house was a pine forest and arrowheads were found and it was their fishing spot.
Okay. Ezra Stiles drew a map in the 1760s where he shows Nehantic wigwams in that area on the on the east shore of Nehantic Bay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you think that's the area we're talking
Oh, yeah,
about?
absolutely.
So they had wigwams there?
Yep, they had wigwams here. They had both wigwams and houses on this reservation.
Now, the arrowheads, they were used to catch fish or to catch game?
They used arrows for predominantly hunting animals such as deer, rabbit, bear, moose. I mean, I've recovered remains of those animals at some of the archaeological sites. They had pretty good fishing technology. They had seines, they had fish weirs that would actually jut out into the water, and then kids with sticks or whatever would thrash the water, the fish would get stuck into the fish weir, and then the women and kids would go and pick the fish out of the weir. The weir would be like a woven, a lot of sticks woven together so that the fish would get halfway through without
Oh, yeah, okay.
and I found some of those fish weirs in Bashan Lake up in East Haddam. We have a very nice one that's under about 20 feet of water in Boston, in the Boylston Street. While they're doing construction, they actually discovered the fish weir. And they're still used, fish weirs are still used. I've seen them out on Gardner's Bay, and I've seen them up on Bay of Fundy.
So this wigwam here is typical of what you were saying?
That one of the types of wigwams that would have been used in this area, depending upon what time of the year, the wigwam would either be covered in light material like that. During the winter, they would use either elm bark or bark from an oak tree that was pretty thick, almost like shingles. And they were very comfortable, kept the heat within them, and weren't smoky. The Native Americans kept on talking to Roger Williams. How can they build these awful places, their homes, with dirt floors, smoky? You could only, smoke in those things was horrific. And the native wigwams were quite comfortable, had thousands of years of trial and error to get them really tweaked out. They were very good. This is representative of a wigwam that would be used during the warmer months.
Yeah. Before we go, can you say something about the cemetery, because that spans ancient times and 2021?
Oh, yeah. Okay. The cemetery is a sacred place. As I mentioned, I can first document it being used in 1641, and the sachem Weekwash said, "I want to be buried in the traditional burial ground." 1641. It had already been the traditional burial ground, so it had been used in prehistory. The last burial that was there was documented in 1878. It is the resting place of our ancestors. There are probably over 450 burials that are there, and that would be conservative. If you did a life chart of all the people that existed between 1641 and 1878, you would exceed that number greatly of 450. I mean, I can guarantee you, every person from 1641, and that's because I'm a scientist, all the way up to 1878, they all died. Okay? That's because I'm a scientist. If we used a chart that said, okay, only half of those individuals are buried there, we'd still have at least that many in there. So that's a conservative number. The people that are counted by Ezra Stiles in 1761 He's got 85 people living on the reservation at that time. The numbers increased to 104 and then drop off at the turn of the century. They are being buried in the traditional burial ground that starts here and works to the west along the ridge and parallel to Columbus Avenue. Ezra Stiles drew a map of the cemetery in 1641 when he was staying in Benjamin Champlin's house, which is the House of Wicker up on Main Street. That belonged to Benjamin Champlin. In 1768, Benjamin Champlin's cows wandered into the upper 100 of the reservation, right here. Came across, there wasn't a railroad track. That came in 1854, and when that came in, they found a couple burials. So the burials extend well beyond this area, okay? Benjamin Champlin's cows came into the cornfields of Amtrak, and it's a short train. The natives went to the court because they believed in justice and equality and justice will be served, and said, hey, Benjamin Champlin's cows are in our cornfield. Can you do something about this? And in the great movement of the court, they said, yeah, we can solve this problem. Benjamin Champlin will now get your cornfields. But excluded from that will be your traditional burial ground. That you will have in perpetuity. That means like forever, okay? That's a very critical document. Very, very important document. We're very lucky today that here is a public park with no houses on it, no real problems in it. We all have access to the traditional burial ground. We have access to the remains of our ancestors. We are able to honor them. We have a small area over to the west on the boundary of McCook Park and I don't know it's not Columbus, it goes down the hill to the entrance. Atlantic? Good. Okay. And there we have had a couple of signboards placed. There's one that was placed several years ago by the Historical Society that documents the state declaring the tribe here on the reservation extinct. That still remains, and we have now placed, with the help of the Park and Rec Commission of East Lyme, 3 new signboards that help to educate people about the sacred nature of this particular location. Boy, are we lucky that there is a park here, and we can all, enjoy that and pay respect to our ancestors that are here.
We're not through though with John, but I just want to say, since so many people here are from Nehantic and East Lyme, we may need your support down the line in terms of continuing to restore our cemetery. The Parks and Rec, as John said, took care of rectifying a number of things that were happening on the cemetery over in the corner near the chain link fence, and they were astounded to know that Nehantics were around and were objecting to the fact that there was continuing desecration. So that kind of prompted us to say, well, we've been in the shadows long enough. We're going to step out. We have our ducks in a row, and we want to be able to protect what remains of the cemetery, but also to join the community fabric now of Nehantic and of East Lyme. So down the line, this is our very first event out here, and gosh, in terms of public, probably since before 1871, before that, when the infamous declaration of the extinction of the Nehantics was made, nobody checked with my great-grandfather who lived up the river because of the diaspora we had to leave. No one checked with Ray Tatton's great-grandparents. Nobody checked with Mark Strickland's parents and great-grandparents. And when I called John after one of his presentations, I happened to see that East Lyme was presenting Remembering the Nehantics, and I was away in France at the time, but when I got home, I called John and said, John, I descended from the Nehantics, and I think there was a gasp on the other side of the line because he had met maybe two before me. And so as we reconstituted ourselves, and through the Jeffrey line, which I descended from, I was able to locate Jeffrey cousins in Michigan, Illinois, Arizona, Arkansas, Arizona, Iowa. And so we have been meeting for the last 12 years here, pretty much keeping to ourselves, getting reacquainted with the land. John has taken us around to sites. So anyway, I just want to, in closing, unless Chief Ray or Mark would like to say something, I just want to say that we're really incredibly happy that we are being welcomed in the sense in our own place, but that you all, I hope you accept us as rejoining the fabric of the East Lyme community. And one of the things before I stop in, I really have to appreciate a man here who has been really, really instrumental in helping us preserve our heritage over at the East Lyme Historical Society room. And Dick Waterman here, who just came in, has spent a good part of his life gathering. So Dick was one of the first people I met, and was incredibly generous and warm and greeting us and meeting us and sharing all of the artifacts they've collected in the letters and the correspondence and of the people from Brothertown and beyond. So thank you so much, Dick. I'm so glad to see you again. And that's all I have to say. I could, like John, I could talk a lot more too, but I don't know if either our chief would like to say a word, or if our other tribal council member would like to before we close out. All right, a man of few words. All right, this is Ray Tatton. His family has been on the tribal records since tribal records were even recorded. So here we have another council member, Mark.
Well, I just want to say thank you for showing up, and thank you for joining us in the celebration of our culture and history. And this is just a great moment for all of us. It's a great moment for the Nehantics. It's a great moment for all the residents of East Lyme, Niantic, and I'm looking forward to interacting much more in the future.
I may have inadvertently cut off more questions from the floor here. I have Steve, who just mentioned that he might have a question for us or for John.
Sure, yeah. I think I can, well, I love microphones. I try to be soft-spoken, but it doesn't always happen. Yeah, I'm from Old Lyme. My wife and I have been down here for only a couple of years, having moved from Rhode Island, not too far. But we have been engaged with Native people in New England, and I in particular spent several years living with a Cree family up in Hudson Bay in the province of Quebec. And we have a lot of stories and a lot of love for Indigenous people, and we're going to try to start something just like this in Old Lyme. So maybe we can get together if anyone has any comments or questions. We had another card. I'm on the back, my wife's in the front, where she belongs. Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So, were there any other questions from anyone here? Yes.
So the, over in the fenced area, I've visited the granite stone there, which is fantastic. And then there's another monument with a dog and a girl overlooking the water. Does that have any significance to who allowed that to go there, or?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. This is what I was hinting at when I was saying we are hoping to get some support from the townspeople. Over the years, this has been part of the continuing encroachment and basically desecration of the site. So way back, yeah, when I came in here and the first time I saw that statue, it was a very frivolous statue, very playful. Apparently it's a statue that won first prize in a local sculpture contest or something, but it was placed right there over our ancestors. And then within a year or two, there was another one. And without pointing any fingers, I think, and John thinks, and Ray thinks, and Mark thinks that probably this was not intended to be a desecration. It's just people didn't know. And so the, what would I say? I'm looking for a suitable expression, but something about hitting the fan. When last year in October, I was meeting some friends at the beach and we were going to picnic, and then I wanted to come up to the cemetery. And again, I have no idea if anyone who is behind this is here, but there were an increasing number of little shrubs planted with little shrines and little memorials and plastic flowers, and that I felt really needed to be rectified. So I got in touch with John and then Elsbeth and Michelle Maitland, people in town that we had contact with, and then they put us in touch with the Park and Recreation people, and we met. Mark, Ray, John, and myself, we met in front of the statue, the stone that says we're extinct, and they were genuinely, deeply baffled. They had never thought that we were still around. And so that was, I think, was a real catalyst for getting us to come out of the shadows, as I said, and to start saying that there's a lot of us around here. And there's certainly the diaspora of the Nehantics that spreads way out through the Midwest and up the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So thank you for bringing that up. I have not been over there. The Parks and Rec people promised to clean that up. There's some kind of a remnant of an asphalt piece of pavement there. They were going to get rid of that. So they scrambled to get those 3 signs in that John wrote up and placed next to a signage placed next to the stone to kind of say, whoa, that was then, we're still here now, and going forward, this explains us, explains the military history, explains the cultural history, and the fact that we're still here. So, like I said, looking ahead, I don't think we're going to need to get into a confrontation with the town, but we would like to have that return to us. John says this is all burial ground, and this is a tiny little corner, maybe of a 1/16 of an acre, but we definitely feel that that should be respected at the very least. So thanks for that question, but that's the story.
And then, you can see it, right down the corner. You just go down the road, you go down inside the park, you go down the road, and I was just gonna mention the other, the spring.
Yeah,
which should be, I think, part of this, park also, this separate, cemetery.
So if anybody's not sure, just when you're leaving the park, there's a nice slow winding road, and just before the bend, or at the bend, at the foot of the hill, you see those 2 posts marking the entranceway. Well, up from that, there's a low stone wall, which may or may not have been part of the cemetery. And
It was part of the cemetery.
it was part of the cemetery. And then there's a space hardly as big as this cement pavilion here, and then there's a chain link fence. So it's right in that spot, right there.
Behind the bathroom.
Yes, the bathhouse.
Yeah, it's on this level. There is a spot called Lucretia's Spring, I think, which is what you were talking about. And there's a local story. Yeah, there's a local story about a native woman who spent time waiting there for her lover or husband to come back from a trip across the sound and never did. So we don't know if that's authentic, but it's, oral history. I mean, there's always a nugget of something that came down from past ages. Yeah.
There's another place that I've been told about, I've never seen it. It's called the Indian Steps. It's supposed to be going down in line with Big Wigwam Rock.
We went to a Crescent Beach Day festivities a few years ago, and they had a whole room set up, and one of the things they had a picture of was Indians, I shouldn't say Indian, but they were stone steps, they looked like, going down this way, and you could see Wigwam Rock. And we were told that the Indian steps were directly out from Wigwam Rock, and that the local Indians had used it for many, many, many years. And so my son and I went one day, and we tried to walk through the area, and there's all poison ivy. And vines that, bittersweet, everything. I mean, you would get all scratched up, you'd get poison ivy. But I'm really curious if those steps are there.
Did you ever find it?
No.
I don't know much about it.
Anybody from Crescent Beach, because it was their
Well,
day.
We donated all that history to the East Lyme Museum to preserve it.
Do you remember hearing about the Indian steps?
A little bit, but I've been around, for 50 years here, but
You've never seen them?
I've never really researched how to get to them.
Well, they always said they're right up from Wigwam Rock.
But
Because
there's a
they,
picture of it, it would still be in the museum, that they
Yeah.
donated all the,
okay, it's a black and white
pictures.
photo.
And there's also no marker anywhere that says, we live on Black Point Road, and I know we were in the upper 100 acres of what was the reservation. There's nothing that ever identifies that this is where the reservation was. The only
We
things
were-
that are over here.
We were amazed. We've lived in town for 35 years, and we've lived down on Black Point Road for 14. And we never knew, we had no idea we were on a reservation. And we went to a local, it was a talk
It was
through
in the Nehantic
the,
talk down at the police station.
at the police station about 5 years ago. And they brought out this map with the first 100 acres, the
That's right.
second, and the third. And we were astounded. And I grew up in Waterford. I mean, I'm as local can be. And I never knew there was a reservation.
This is a case in point, concept known as erasure, and it's common all over New England, and
I
maybe
feel
they
really
can't
bad
get,
about
well,
that.
but yeah, this is why you're here though, because you are, and this is why we wanted to come out and start sharing with you what we know of our history going back thousands of years and what John has done for his lifetime here. But there is this concept of erasure, and it was very much the vogue in the 1880s, for example, where what we would call the white antiquarian historians, who basically described the last of the Mohicans, the last of the Nehantics. And there's a book written about that called Firsting and Lasting, who was the first and who was the last one. But the native tribes were often depicted as, like Mercy and Nonsuch, depicted as the last Nehantic. So it's not your fault that you didn't know, because none of our kids, we were talking with children today, in East Lyme High School, they have no idea. They don't know any of this. And no one does. So we have, what I propose to the kids in conjunction with John is to let students know that we'd be willing to start a history walk along this area and having kids, getting kids out of the classroom and walking along and hearing the story, whether it's of Lucretia Springer, whether it's of the extinction stone, but we could take in quite a bit. Dick, I'll bring this to you.
I don't know if it's gonna be.
Well, I certainly appreciate all you folks coming out here for a very important program about the people who were the original people that lived in this area. I brought some materials with me which I'd like to share with you. I divided them into two groups. One group of papers really pertain to the Nehantic. The other group of papers are more general in the information that they have on it. And I was just interested in this bunch of Henry Matthews a moment ago, who married Mercia and such. That is a Mohegan marrying a Nehantic. So, somewhere along the line, there are descendants of these people. Like many people, they've disappeared, but they must still be in existence. I find that very interesting. The other thing that I'd like to mention is there is on Hope Street a very important mortar owned by a private person in town, and he has built a fence, and the fence goes through the mortar. It's rather large. I've just been around. He's willing to have a big deal. And I think that it would be interesting for us, or for the Historical Society, or for the Nehantics, to arrange to have a dig at that mortar, because there must be a lot of good material next year. It would be it's on the north side of Hope Street, and so you can, his land, of course, that is on the north side, and he's willing to have a dig there. And I think it would be great to find out what's inside that water. I think it would be very interesting activity.
That border sounds really interesting. Yes.
Sorry?
The border sounds really interesting.
Yeah,
It's really
people
big.
drive by it every day. Don't even notice it's there. But I think it would be very worthwhile to find what's there. Okay? Now I'll give you the papers that I have here. I have them in two folders. You want me to go this way? It's all right. A lot of this material was written by a lady known as Eva Butler. And I don't know if anyone in here knows Eva Butler and ever heard about her.
Yes.
Her husband was superintendent of schools of Groton. And she used to teach for the William State Teachers College. And her courses all were about Native Americans. And so, in these papers that I've given you are several papers written by Eva Butler. Interestingly enough, there are many people that thought that she was a Native American, but she wasn't. But she was a wonderful person, and a lot of students took courses with her. So those papers will be available to use in any way in which you want to use. I think just reading some of them will be very interesting for you, especially the ones that deal locally with Henry Matthews and Mercy Ann and such, because they had offspring.
They had, I think, 2 daughters.
Yes. But, like so many people, they simply just want to be like the rest. You know what I say? They didn't really keep it down. So anyway, that's about all I have to say, sir.
Nick, thank you so much.
That reminds you of him talking about the mortar. There's another place that's marked on one of these maps. I don't know which it's on this one here, but there's an Indian well that's marked on the map down near the brook that feeds into the Patagonia River. That I don't know that anyone has ever.
Nobody's found it, I don't think.
It's on the old map, but it's not identified anywhere now. There may be a parking lot over it right now. It's down. There's a doctor's office down there.
I've heard about it.
It's at the end of Whittlesey Place. Whittlesey Court.
Charlie's place.
It's across the brook from that.
Right across the brook from Charlie's.
I've looked.
That would
for
be
it. I
another
couldn't
place
find
to-
it. Yeah. I've looked for it. I couldn't find it either. But I mean, this area's changed. Let's face it, guys. You know, it gets built on. People don't know, and this is part of our responsibility is to help have everybody kind of understand that this is what was here at one time. And you know, when we're gone, if we can't let the next generation know, it's going to be gone. So that really is part of our responsibility too. And that's the historical societies, but it's also everybody that's listening today, and those people that should have been listening today.
So one of the things that John just put his finger on, I don't know if you think of it in these terms, but this is how information gets passed on from one generation to the next, or from one set of people of one part of the community. Oral histories, this is how it happens. People talking to each other about things they thought they heard of, and do you know about this? And then Dick passing on this information to those of us who are a little bit younger, but not too much, right? So, but anyway, that's how I would look at this gathering, as a way of passing on oral histories and oral information, and get people thinking about it. So I have that hand.
There's two buildings. There's a Nehantic Indian School on Fairhaven, and there's the Reservation Superintendent's House.
Probably one of the overseers, right?
Yeah.
It's right at the beginning of Black Point
At
Road.
the beginning of Black Point
Yeah,
Road.
he's still there. It's
Man-
Manwaring's house.
The old man.
That's the superintendent of
Yeah.
Yeah, right across from where we live.
Calvin, isn't it? Calvin Manwaring?
the school.
I don't know the first.
There-
That's an interesting point. I mean, I'm outsider in some ways. I live in northern Massachusetts, but I've heard this name Manwaring quite a bit. John had turned up a lot of documents as he was the last, well, maybe the last overseer, or next to the last. But anyway, a lot of these records of our community were kept by the overseers. Those of us who were natives were not really capable of taking care of our own affairs, so we needed a superintendent or a supervisor who kind of called the shots. There was a couple of our ancestors who were not allowed to be part of the proceeds from various land transactions because the overseer didn't feel that these particular ancestors were full-blooded Nehantics, and so that person can go scratch. As a matter of fact, there's John told us about a woman who, did she go down to New London and with her children had to move away because, so all of these stories that maybe you all never heard, but it's just a generation, 2 generations back. And I mentioned the erasure part, the erasure, and that was really, it was a going thing. I mean, people just said, oh, well, they all rode off into the sunset and that never were heard of again. And that, that suited some people. Yeah.
Well, there's a Adawan Beach, right? I mean, I think that's named after Chief Adawan, right?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, who was actually from up in the Lyme area, up around Hamburg Cove. Yeah.
Joshua Rock. Joshua Rock on the Connecticut River. I've heard that story since I was so high.
Yeah. You got Joshua Road up on the hill there.
And it used to be a great place to
Selvins.
fish below it until late in the 20th century when the Corps of Engineers filled it in with sludge from the river.
Yes.
Hi, is Chief Ninigret, was he Nehantic?
Yeah.
He was, right? Okay, because my,
As I had mentioned before, there were several villages at one time that were Nehantic. There was certainly one here. There was one at the mouth of the Connecticut River on the Griswold property. There was probably another one on Smith Cove, and they dotted this area, okay? And they extended all the way to Charlestown.
well, the Ninigret house is down in Crescent Beach. It was a speakeasy and everything at one time. They closed up, my grandparents bought it, painted it all up, opened it up as Seaview Manor. And it was, people stayed there, okay? But the dishes in there have Chief Ninigret on there. Say
really?
Ninigret. I've got a couple at home, I don't know if that's.
So the backstory, and John can certainly fill in the details, but the backstory is the Ninigret family were the chief people who were considered the sachems of the Niantic / Nehantic. And so if you go over closer to the Narragansett Reservation in Charlestown, you see Ninigret State Park, and the Ninigret was a Nehantic. I was at the Narragansett powwow when in the church service a woman got up and said, if it weren't for Ninigret and the Nehantics, the Narragansetts wouldn't be here. And so the situation is that John addressed earlier this morning, the difference between what are now called Western Nehantics and Eastern Nehantics. So it's all one group. But in King Philip's War, the Narragansetts got sucked into King Philip's War and were devastated. There was without reliving the King Philip's War, there was an English kind of a treacherous attack on their fort in the Great Swamp, where several hundred were killed and burned alive. And that, of course, happened in September, and that's consistently commemorated by the Narragansetts. But that contingent of Narragansetts moved north. And curiously, they wound up in the town where I was born, which is up in Montague on the Connecticut River, now known as Turner's Falls. And the Narragansetts moved up there. There was a horrific massacre at that site. And then as they came back, greatly reduced, the Nehantic / Niantic, who did not get drawn into King Philip's War, took in the survivors of the Narragansett Nation. And that's why that woman said, if it weren't for the Niantics and Nehantics, they would not be there. And as the Narragansetts reconstituted their numbers, the Niantic on that part under Ninigret took the Narragansett name because it had so much power. But it was a quote-unquote royal family. So there were about 5-6 Ninigrets in a row, right up to, till my ancestor built a house on the Narragansett Reservation in 1720 because Tom Ninigret allowed him to do that on the reservation. And then by 1760, there was a lot of political infighting, and a number of succeeding Ninigrets were in charge, but eventually that played itself out with one of my ancestors leaving that part and coming here. So there's a lot of Indian history, Native American history. It's not an insult to say Indian, it's okay. It depends on your attitude, I guess, and the way you say it. But the Narragansett Indian tribe exists, the Wampanoag Indian tribe. John doesn't like Indian, so we don't use that in our name. But he's right. We consider ourselves the native. But I know a lot of people are a little bit, reluctant to use the word Indian because they might think it's derogatory, but it's not. But just the way it's used, I guess. So anyway, that's the answer to your Ninigret question. Yeah, it was a very powerful local chieftain who set up really a long-lived dynasty of the descendants in running the Narragansetts over there.
My geography's a little weak in that part of Rhode Island, but where's Charlestown in relation to Kingston?
South and west. Okay. So it's south.
Would Native Americans who were living in Kingston be part of the Narragansett and Nehantic? I asked that for a reason, but.
Sure, yes, but I mean, these are various village locations, and people travel back and forth from all of those. I mean, that's why it's so hard to say, oh, you know, USDA climb this tribe versus this tribe versus this tribe. It's a misleading concept of branding a certain group of people to a certain area. As I have said before, natives did not stay in one place for very long. And the system was such that the men could move around pretty well, but there was a clan mother that you never really got to like. She was really tough. And you wanted to get the hell out of there as fast as you could and stay away from it. So you'd go to another village. And that's no joke. I mean, you really voted with your feet. You moved away instead of having some kind of aggressive confrontation. Aggressive confrontations are bad. In a native tradition, you avoid that at all consequences. Everybody in a village you need them all to cooperate, to pool their resources. You lose one, you lose two, that could be the end of everything. So there are various systems put in place that would ensure that you could go there, or there. So, I mean, we have people here in Nehantic, Black Point Village, going all the way to New Haven. We have people from this area going all the way to Charlestown, all the time. Out to Montauk, all the time. The records are full of people canoeing across the Sound. Natives, all times of the year. Yeah, maybe today, but I don't, I wouldn't want to do that.
No. Dick would like to say something.
I'd like to just mention that one of your folks recently died. She's out from Wisconsin. Her name is Loretta McCook.
She was here for one of our early meetings.
She was here at our first meeting, yes, she came. And interestingly enough, she lived in Wisconsin with the Oneidas. And she was a United States Army helicopter pilot. And her native name was Poprienta. And the Poprienta owned land right here on Black Point Road where Wilbur Beckwith lived.
And David, great-grandmother, is it? Poprienta.
And so I thought it would be nice to remember her because of her service. And she came to our first program.
So that was, her first name was Loretta. Her first name?
Loretta Metoxen.
Yeah, Loretta Metoxen. Right. I corresponded with her quite a bit.
Go on the internet, you'll find her.
Yeah. We wrote her a couple of times to see if she could come to our annual gathering at East Lyme, and she was never quite able to do it. She was off. She said, well, I can't come this year. I've got to go to France with my grandson, and I can't come this year. So she's very, very important person, descended from this area, had lineage connecting her here. Her family went to Brothertown in Oneida, and did she continue on over to Wisconsin, or did she? Yes. So that is the part of the Nehantic diaspora. People left, as John said earlier, to as indentured servants. Others, like the Tattons, were in the military service. My people left, joined the urban population, and came back. So, yeah. But Loretta Thompson will be greatly honored for sure. Any further questions? This has been really great. I'm glad we were able to continue. Oh, question? Wait, yeah.
I'm just, my family, I have family living on McCook Point Road in Waterford, and
Yep.
I'm just wondering is that Mako, and what does that mean?
I don't know, and you're not gonna hear that too often. I excavated an archaeological site out there, at Mako Point, and what was really neat about it, a lot of fish remains, a lot of bluefish, a lot of striped bass, but most of all, big scales from sturgeon, like that, and it's a really neat site. That site also had some burials in it that were excavated in the 20s and 30s. They had washed out during storms and so forth and so on. You know, Mako Point, there was a village there.
So, but is Magonk, it says M-A-G-O-N-K, is that the same thing as Mako, or is it like?
Very likely. I don't know what the word means. And we've been trying to reconstruct various words that are Nehantic. That one I don't know as of yet, but things change. And we make discoveries all the time.
So spell it again.
It's Magonk, M-A-N-G-O-N-K.
M-A-N.
No, M-A-G-O-N-K.
M-A-G. Okay, yeah. I have one of these rare books published in the early '60s about Native American place names, and it's like this thick. So if I can remember how to spell it, I'll check it out. Yeah, we'll find that information. But it does, all of these fantastically beautiful place names that have been retained have very, very practical meanings, like good place to fish, or good place to cross the river, good rocks right here, but it sounds just beautiful in Algonquian. So I'll check that out and somehow get back to you maybe in a year.
You got another question over there?
Okay, just a quick one. I'm just wondering if someone is going to take the leadership on and continue this conversation. Weekly, monthly, something like that, please.
I think that's a great idea. I don't know where we're at, but I do want to say that probably the best way to learn more is to sign up for the East Lyme Historical Society's newsletter. We've been recording these. Hopefully it's still recording. It's gonna take me a couple of days, but I'm gonna get these videos up on YouTube, and then we will distribute the links. I have a Facebook page up about this event, so I'll share the links there, but sharing them through the East Lyme Historical Society will probably be the most effective way to reach anybody who's interested. But in terms of the conversation,
At this stage, the tribal council will be meeting pretty regularly, but maybe we will have to take that up and to figure out a way. I've got your card. We could figure out a way if there would be a place, probably at the East Lyme Historical Museum or elsewhere in Old Lyme, where we could at least get together for a conversation again in a few months. But like I said, it'll be a tribal council decision as to what to do about this here. Otherwise, we'll be right back here in a year, that's for sure. Many thanks to Liz, the East Lyme Historical Society, and Dick Waterman, Elizabeth, who has put all of these children's activities